All right, so this is my most basic version of the exercise, right? I took inspiration from the monkey here. I'll unlock it and put it at 100% just so you can see how it's changed quite a bit, but it's got the main components. It's got the expression, it's got the smile and the tongue, it's got the whiskers, it's got the ears, just I put them all into the places to match like an Aesop's Fables fox. And when you get some distance from it and you look at it again, you might see, oh, I want to make little tweaks to it. So for instance, I want to bring in that cheek a little bit. So that's what's great about vectors is you can keep modifying without worry about losing quality because they're infinitely scalable. So I'm just going to bring in that edge just a little bit. There, that looks nice. And everything here is really simple. There's only a few colors. Everything's just a filled shape, but some of those shapes, like the ears, like the whiskers, like the mouth, like the nose, are fairly complicated. Now, if I wanted to add one thing, I like how foxes have a really strong nose ridge, right? So I'm going to just add my own shape as an oval right here, right centered, and I'm going to pick a new color. And it's just going to be a lighter version of that lighter fur tone, right? And then I'm going to Command T, right click inside, and I'm going to play with this perspective tool, right? And perspective is just going to widen it in a very particular way. If it has enough anchor points. And I was hoping it would just widen the base, but because it has so few anchor points, it doesn't do that yet, so I first have to warp it. Just I've been showing you a lot of warp. But that allows me to make these individual corners a little bit stronger. So I want them to overlap with the nose. Okay, now, because I've got more anchor points, if I do Command T and I say perspective, this can give me a more interesting shape on each side, you know, instead of always just warping it on my own. Then I can see if I like that, or I can stretch it up, holding down Shift, and lengthen it. Or I can warp it again and even bend the top around the eyes in. So another complex shape. And now I have to ask myself, do I like that better than if it's not there? And that's where history is very helpful. Like I can always just go before that step and then see if I like it better. And I think I do, but I think I'm just going to dim its color a little bit, make it a little bit darker. There we go. So it's just pretty subtle. And maybe, little final touches, I'll flatten out the top a little using warp. Okay. Now, how do I turn this in? Well, the first thing to do to turn this in is to turn off your non-vector shape layers. So that would be your onion skin layer, turn it off. You don't need to delete it, you just want to turn it off. And your background layer, turn it off. So that the only image you see is made from vector shape layers, all of which are not rasterized. They all have that little square. Then what you're going to do is check your image size. Image size, make sure it's at least 8 by 10 by 300 pixels per inch. And it can be bigger. In fact, right now, I can just increase it to 14 inches by 12.5 inches, at 300 pixels per inch and say OK, and it will be perfectly clean now at that resolution because they're all vector layers. That's the big advantage. This can be turned into any size you want and always be perfectly clean as long as you only have your vector layer showing. Now I'm going to save it. First, just Command S to save it as a PSD file, and you'll see that in your folder. Right? Here's my PSD file marked orange. Not orange, it marked green. But now we need to make it a file type that shows up in Canvas. And for an emoji, you don't want a white rectangle behind your emoji. You want it free floating like a typeface, right? So we are going to save this as a PNG. So we say File, Save a Copy. Make sure your background is turned off so that it's just a checkerboard, right? And you're going to say, under Format, not Photoshop, but PNG. This is our transparent online raster format. It's going to save to exercise 2, but you can also save it to the desktop and then put it into your folder. And then you just want to make sure you see it. So there is my PNG. I am not going to save it as a JPEG because I don't want a white background. And now these two things, the PNG that was the screen grab or the download, I'll just do the download, the one that's gray, from the Emoji Maker site, and the PNG of the shape emojis you made using Photoshop or Photopea, those are the two requirements for exercise 2. So scroll down, we go to where we post them, we hit reply. And Taylor, remember, you're going to post your line art in assignment 1 once it's done. But anyway, that's for digital honors. So I'm going to start my post with my name. Right. And I'll usually remind you I'm the instructor. And then I'm going to first drag in the emoji I made from the website that I based mine on. It's kind of my sketch. And then my own PNG, not the PSD, right? We only had, I think, one student for exercise 1 posted as a PSD, but it was 40 megabytes. It won't embed. Now, how big do you want to make them? You want to make them at least double the size of your name, right? So we can see them clearly. So I'm going to increase them a little bit, and I'm going to put these ones side by side so we can see them clearly. All right, now I have met all the requirements. And you can see as a PNG, it takes whatever background is behind it. Okay, now I can show you the bonus finishing example, right? So this is the demo example of all just flat shapes matching. Now we can try to make a flat 2.0 version. We can add tones, and we can add shadows, and we can even add gradations and even texture without getting too crazy with it. So now I go back to my Photoshop. This is bonus finishing. I've already met the requirements, but I'm going to learn a finishing technique just like we did for exercise 1. And wouldn't it be cool to have little highlights? So Flat 2.0 is adding highlights and shadows to the focal points. So for one, I might add a highlight inside the ears. So I'm going to go to Auto Select, and I'm going to click on the ear just so it takes me right to that layer. I'm going to duplicate it, Command J. Then I'm going to transform, Command T, and I'm going to hold down Option while I squeeze in. And then I'm going to double click on it, and I'm going to change the color. And that gives me a little highlight in the ear. And then what can I do? I can duplicate that, Command J, Command T. So it's no longer about just doing the most you can with the fewest shapes. Now it's about adding lights and darks to them for what in design we call Flat 2.0, which often clients want to see a version of even if they decide to go more minimal. Maybe now in the eyes, I want to do the same thing, duplicate, but change the color and do a nice highlight maybe not solid white, but like a pretty light gray. And then Command T, and then hold down Option, hit return, and now maybe just offset that a little bit with the move tool, and I'm using my arrow keys just to move it in a really controlled way. Then I'm going to duplicate that, and I'm going to bring that over. Now, to move a layer up above without having to drag and drop it, you can also do Command right bracket, and that will move it up through the layers. Command left bracket will move it down. These are shortcuts right underneath Command plus and minus for zooming in and zooming out. Command right bracket moves it up. Command left bracket moves a layer down if it's selected. Okay, now let's take that same shape, duplicate it again, and now let's move it on top of the nose and stretch it. Hold down Option and Shift, stretch it out, and then maybe use Warp, bend it up so it's like the highlight on top of the nose. Hope I don't like how lopsided that is. Right in the middle. There we go. Then I can move that, center it, so I have a highlight on the nose. Again, these are things to play with if you like. Now I can take that same shape, duplicate it, transform it, rotate it, shrink it, and I'm going to move it onto the tongue. Command right bracket will move it up, right? And tilt it a little bit more. And then this will be tricky. And there's lots of ways I can do it. Actually, the easiest way, instead of trying to warp it to match that, I am simply going to make a new shape, a new ellipse, and I will make it this color, right? And then I will transform it as a mask. So instead of erasing, because you can't erase without rasterizing it, you don't want to rasterize, you can just use kind of controlled versions. Actually, I'm going to do this. Of your shapes. And run them on the top of everything. There we go. Yep. So now I have a highlight in the tongue. Let's see, maybe on the snout, I can take that same one, duplicate it. Because it's a vector shape, it will scale up beautifully, and I can make it on the nose ridge. Make it bigger, rotate it off to one side. Now this starts to hint at a light source. And maybe I'll make that just a slight bit darker. So now I have a bit of a light source. I can copy that and maybe move it onto the inside of the ear as well, just on that side. Maybe tuck it under. There we go. And then stretch it out. I'm going to warp it. Make it match the ear. So I'm doing what I often do, and I'm making it a little bit more complicated than I need to. Just having fun with it. But you're adding lights and darks to these different shape objects. So now, what about shadows? Now, instead of adding highlight shadow shapes, I can use another finishing technique that we haven't really gotten introduced to yet, not all of us. And these are called layer styles. Not blending modes like normal or multiply, but individual layer styles. So I want there to be a shadow on this side of the nose. So if I take that nose shape and I double click on that vector shape layer, it opens up my layer style options. and I'm going to add a drop shadow.